Hello, my name is Duncan and welcome to Back Away from the Donkey and Bath Books. And today I'm going to talk about Losing the Head of Philip K. Dick, which I have here. Well, actually, it's not his head. This is a bit of a slight prop. But no, this is the book. I actually finished it last night. It's more of my sort of collection of books with Philip K. Dick in them, which aren't written by Philip K. Dick, which I seem to be getting quite a collection of. This is by David Dufty, and it is what people would probably classify as popular science, which is a term I absolutely hate. And this is about the story about some scientists in 2004 building a android of Philip K. Dick and basically losing his head. That's exactly what it says. I finished it last night, so I don't normally talk about books this quickly because I normally have a couple of weeks to sort of ruminate on them before I talk about them, but I just felt like doing this one a bit quicker, and also, well, some of the stuff is in my head. It's obviously a non-fiction book. David Dufty is I can't remember his name, but he is a research officer at Bureau of Statistics, but he knows the people and he interviewed them, and he's written this almost in a sort of way like he was here, which he's explained at the beginning, but it's a really interesting story. It's basically, I said, they built this AI robot of Philip K. Dick. They really built it, and they went to some shows and what have you, and then basically the head was in a bag on a plane and got left on the plane. Literally, that is what it is. But what is interesting about this story is about the discussions around AI and artificial intelligence and about how they do it. I've got some notes in front of me just because I can forget it over. Because he was much more than a head. There was two main people. There was a guy called David Joseph Hansen, and Hansen was the main. He was the initial driving force. He developed some androids beforehand, but he was more of an artist and a psychologist really than anything else. And his ideas were the fact that to interact with computers, you want them to be more lifelike. The whole thing was more of an experiment about man and computers interactions. So the Philip K. Dick robot, it was more like a sort of a portrait of Philip K. Dick rather than a total simulation of him. Obviously, considering Philip K. Dick's books, the amount he talks about what's human and what's real and what's not real, in some ways that's why they sort of pulled to him as an author to try to almost recreate it. It was to use this AI robot as a demonstration. There was another guy called Coney who was the guy who wrote most of the code for the robot so that they could literally talk to the robot and even have discussions with him. And so obviously to do one of Philip K. Dick was going to be very, very difficult. Not difficult, but they had to write the code, they had to design him, and everything like this. So physically design him, Hansen sculpted the head, and he had this material which he called, I think it was called flubber, which was like a latexy type thing to make it more skin-like the face, and he sculpted the face, and then he did all the mechanics underneath, which he'd done on some previous of his own androids. And this was to get the head. Well, Coney and some other people were concentrating on the actual software to get him to interact with people. They also went to see Philip K. Dick's daughters to basically ask for permission, even though I don't think legally they needed permission. And the daughters were a bit sort of, okay, this is a little bit suspicious. But they offered to let them do it, and as long as they had the final veto of whether they thought it was okay. So the robot, I'll show you some pictures up here of what Philip K. Dick robot looked like, because it was quite a lifelike. And if you'll notice at the back, you have lots of wires coming out of the head, which is where it was connected to the computers which were controlling the brain. But they uploaded basically all his written work, and that includes huge amounts of essays, but there's a huge amount of interviews that Philip K. Dick did in the last few years of his life. He seemed to interview anybody, and they reckon there's probably more material, written words material out there of these interviews with him than there is of his own fiction. So that information was put into there. And what was interesting is when daughters came off to sign on it, his daughter came and spoke to it and said, rather the fact it was a bit weird, but it was very like her father, as soon as the AI, Philip K. Dick, heard her name, it went on to some spiel about how her mother had left with her as a daughter for a while, which she said was just a bit creepy. So yeah, so this whole story is all around that point, but it also is a way for teaching people about AI and this idea of social robotics, about how we interact with computers. And you also get a description of Uncanny Valley, which people use it more now about films, but it was developed by a psychologist, Japanese psychologist, which I cannot remember his name off the top of my head. And it's the idea that if something's almost human, but there's something off on it, you find it uncanny, so you're better off making something totally like a person. Hansen, obviously, who was developing it, thinks the opposite, because there was no sort of evidence. It was just like a psychological idea, which is why he was pushing to make lifelike robots, which is why he helped develop the Philip K. Dick robot, to try and get people to be comfortable with robots and comfortable with the ideas of them. But I said they work around all this idea of like social robotics, and the book explores all this, and hopefully I'm not going too off the rambling. It's about how these ideas, and also the idea that art belongs with science, not separate from science to some degree. What was a good idea is the Turing test. If you've ever heard of the Turing test, Alan Turing, who was one of the great code breaker who helped break the Enigma code, and he was one who developed this idea for AI, knowing whether something has got intelligence, and that is that you'd have somebody in a room, and this is all typewritten, and either a computer or a person in another room, and they would ask a series of questions. And if the person asking the questions couldn't tell whether the reply was from a human or a computer, that showed intelligence. It's quite a basic idea, and this book explores the problems with that idea. But one of the ideas they do come up with, I do mention, is the fact that the idea of the Turing test, which I think from today, no computer has yet passed, came from Alan Turing's mind. So that was a creative mind, in the same ways that in Philip K. Dick's novels, like Do Androids Dream Electric Sheep, which is, if you don't know the book, the film Blade Runner, they use the Voight-Kampff test, which is to measure emotion to work out what's human and what's not human. That came from the brain of Philip K. Dick. That was also a creative idea from his. So you can't really totally split the idea of science and art. So I hope I'm not rambling too much about this, but this book, so let's get on to actually how the book reads. The book actually reads really well. I really enjoyed it. So I read this in about 2 to 3 days, and I think it's 250 pages, but I'm reading other stuff at the same time. And I said, David Dufty, it's really nicely written. It's narratively, you follow the thread of the story through. I don't want to give too much away about the head and where it turns up, but they did manage to show the whole of the Philip K. Dick computer body in quite a few shows. But it's just the way it explores the ideas, and you also get quite an explanation of some of Philip K. Dick's ideas and his books and how that would relate to the android. And also the irony that they created a android of Philip K. Dick, the man who always questioned what's human and what's real and what's not real. And then bizarrely, in some weird conspiracy theory, the head went missing. And if you know about Philip K. Dick's life, he was incredibly paranoid. He was convinced that many times that he was being followed and being bugged by the FBI. The irony of that just doesn't totally escape them in the book. But I said it's a very well written book. I said it's what people might call popular science, which, as I said, is a term I hate. I love the title Losing the Head of Philip K. Dick, which reminds me of Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia, the Sam Peckinpah film. But yeah, it was a really enjoyable read for me. In some ways, it was a nice break from some of the other stuff that I've been reading. But I hope I've sort of managed to give you a little bit of an overview there. And I said it was originally published in I think 2006. I will have a look in the front of the book. Actually, no, 2012, quite a few years afterwards. And if you're interested in AI, robots, intelligence, or Philip K. Dick, I would recommend reading it because I really enjoyed it. And I think that's my spiel on that book today. And thanks very much for watching, and I will speak to you all very soon.